Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku was the son of best jeanist. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. A hero's first defense is not his fist, Izuku. Nor is it his quirk. The voice was cool, smooth, and carried the undeniable weight of authority. It was a voice that commanded press conferences and subdued villains with a single syllable. It is his silhouette. The way he cuts a figure against the chaos. Chaos is messy. We are the needle and thread that stitches the world back into order. And to do that, one must never be afraid. Izuku Midoriya stood before the full-length mirror in the entryway of the Hakamata estate. The house was a testament to modern minimalism, sharp angles, denim blue accents, and an overwhelming scent of freshly pressed linen. Izuku was 14, small for his age, with a mop of unruly green curls that were the only disorderly thing about him. He wore the standard black gakurin of Aldera Junior High, but on him, it looked different. It was tailored to a millimeter's precision. The fabric was a high-grade wool blend, reinforced with subtle carbon weaving. The collar stood rigid, framing his jaw. He was currently struggling with his shoelaces. Posture, the voice commanded. Izuku snapped his spine straight, his heels clicking together instinctively. He turned to face his father. Tsunaga Hakamata, the current number 3 pro hero, best jeanist, stood at the top of the stairs. He was not in his hero costume, but even his casual wear looked like a runway ensemble. A high-collared cable-knit sweater, tailored dark-washed jeans, and a posture so erect he looked as if he were suspended by a wire from the ceiling. "Good morning, father," Izuku said, bowing exactly 30 degrees. Jeanist descended the stairs, his movements fluid. He stopped before his son, his green eyes narrowing critically behind his long blonde bangs. He reached out, his long, slender fingers adjusting the collar of Izuku's uniform. "Your top button was threatening to come loose," Jeanist murmured, refastening it with a deft flick of his thumb. "And your shoelaces. A single knot is an invitation to disaster. A hero who trips over his own feet is a comedy, not a savior." "Double knot." "Always." "Yes, sir," Izuku mumbled, immediately dropping to a knee to correct his laces. "Do not mumble, Izuku. Enunciate. Clarity of speech reflects clarity of mind." "Yes, father," Izuku corrected himself, his voice wavering only slightly. He finished the knot and stood up. Jeanist inspected him for a moment longer, a silence stretching between them that made Izuku's stomach churn. It wasn't that his father was cruel, far from it. Tsunaga Hakamata was a deeply caring parent who had taken custody of Izuku after his mother, Inko, had passed when Izuku was 5. But he was also a man who believed that perfection was a habit, not an act. Being the son of the number 3 hero meant living under a microscope. "You have your entrance exam application forms today?" Jeanist asked. "Yes. The deadline is tomorrow. And you are putting UA High School as your first choice?" "It's the only choice," Izuku recited the family mantra. Jeanist's eyes softened, just a fraction. He reached out and patted Izuku's shoulder. To anyone else, the gesture would seem stiff, but Izuku knew it was high praise. "You have the potential, Izuku. Your control over the fibers is improving. But control is useless without composure. Remember, keep your head high. Keep your fibers tight." "I will." "Have a good patrol, best jeanist. Have a productive day, Izuku." As Izuku stepped out of the pristine, climate-controlled atmosphere of his home and into the humid heat of the Muzurifu morning, he finally let his shoulders slump. He let out a long, shaky breath, tugging nervously at the high collar that covered his mouth. He was the son of best jeanist. He had a quirk. He had the best training money could buy. So why did he feel like a loose thread waiting to be snipped? The classroom at Aldera Junior High was a chaotic tapestry of teenage hormones, loud voices, and the smell of chalk dust. Izuku sat at his desk, his posture reverting to the rigid discipline his father instilled, even as his mind wandered. He had a notebook open on his desk, Hero Analysis for the Future, Volume 13. He was sketching the new hero, Empty Lady, who had debuted that morning. "Her size manipulation is impressive," he wrote in rigorous kanji. However, the drag coefficient of her costume during expansion must be immense. Spandex blend is standard, but without reinforced seams at the joints, she risks wardrobe malfunctions that could impede public safety ratings. She needs a polymesh weave. Since you're all third years, it's time to think about your futures. The teacher shouted, tossing a stack of papers into the air. But who am I kidding? You're all aiming for the hero course. The class erupted into a display of quirks. Hands turned into rocks, eyes extended on stalks, and minor telekinesis sent pencils floating. Yes, you all have wonderful quirks, the teacher said, calming them down. But remember, using quirks in school is against the dress code. Teach. Don't lump me in with these rejects. The voice was rough, loud, and sounded like gravel grinding against steel. Katsuki Bakugo had his feet up on his desk, leaning back with an arrogant sneer. Bakugo, the teacher sighed. Right, you're aiming for UA High. The class gasped. UA? The acceptance rate is insanely low. I aced the mock exams. Bakugo shouted, small explosions popping in his palms. I'm the only one here with the stuff to go pro. I'll surpass All Might and become the top hero. My name will be etched on the top of the charts. Oh, the teacher interrupted, checking his clipboard. Midoriya, you're applying for UA too, aren't you? The room went dead silent. Slowly, every head turned toward Izuku. He didn't flinch. He didn't shrink away. He sat perfectly straight, his hands folded on his desk, just as he had been taught. Ha! Bakugo froze. His red eyes locked onto Izuku. Midoriya? One student whispered. I mean, well, yeah? Obviously. He's best jeanist's kid, another muttered. Legacy admission for sure. Must be nice, someone scoffed. Having a pro-hero daddy to pave the road for you. Bakugo's chair screeched against the floor as he stood up. He slammed his hand onto Izuku's desk. Smoke curled from his palm, singeing the corner of Izuku's notebook. Bakugo growled. High and mighty. Izuku looked up, meeting Bakugo's gaze. Good morning, Kaken. Your tie is crooked. The class stifled a laugh. Bakugo's vein popped in his forehead. Don't give me that fashion police crap. Bakugo yelled. You think just because you're Hakamata's little mannequin you can stand in the same ring as me? You have a weak-ass quirk, Deku. You can barely tie your own shoes without concentration, let alone fight a villain. It's called textile manipulation, Izuku corrected calmly, though his heart was hammering against his ribs. And while it lacks the raw destructive power of explosion, it has high utility in capture and rescue scenarios. Yui looks for versatility, Kaken. Versatility? Bakugo leaned in, his face inches from Izuku's. You're a copycat. A pale imitation. You're just playing dress-up in your daddy's clothes. You think you're better than us because you act like a robot, but strip away that fancy suit and you're nothing. Izuku's fingers twitched. He felt the threads of his trousers responding to his agitation, tightening slightly around his ankles. He took a deep breath. Composure. Elegance. We'll see at the entrance exam, Izuku said quietly. Bakugo scoffed, turning away. Whatever. Just don't get in my way, or I'll burn that expensive uniform right off your body. The walk home was usually Izuku's time to decompress, but today, the heat was oppressive. He took the route under the underpass to avoid the main crowds. He needed to think. Bakugo's words stung because they hit a nerve Izuku tried very hard to bury. A pale imitation. Izuku's quirk was a mutation of his father's fiber master. But where best jeanist could control all fibers within a massive radius with a mere thought, Izuku's power was tactile. He had to be touching the thread, or touching a thread that was touching the thread. He was a conductor. If the connection broke, his control vanished. He couldn't restrain a villain from 50 yards away. He had to be close. He had to be in the danger zone. His father said it would grow with time. Izuku feared it was a genetic dead end. He walked into the shadow of the tunnel. Squelch. Izuku stopped. The sound came from the manhole cover behind him, a medium-sized invisibility cloak. A gurgling voice hissed. Izuku spun around. A massive wall of dark green sludge rose from the sewers, forming into a towering, liquid face with manic eyes. You'll do nicely, the villain laughed, lunging forward. Izuku's training kicked in. He didn't scream. He stepped back, his right hand grabbing the hem of his jacket. Activate. The threads of his uniform stiffened instantly, turning the cloth as hard as steel. He threw his arm up in a guard. Thwack! The sludge slammed into his hardened sleeve. It held for a microsecond, but fluid dynamics were the natural enemy of fiber arts. The sludge simply flowed around the hardened cloth, engulfing Izuku. Nice trick! The villain gloated. But I'm fluid! You can't bind what you can't hold. The slime forced its way into Izuku's mouth and nose. Panic. Pure, unadulterated panic shattered Izuku's composure. The jeanist discipline evaporated. He clawed at the slime, but his hands just squelched through. He couldn't breathe. His vision began to spot with white light. I'm going to die. I'm going to die here, in a dirty tunnel, ruining my uniform. Father will be so disappointed. The thought was absurd, but it was the last thing that crossed his mind before the manhole cover exploded into the air. Fear not, kid, a voice boomed, echoing off the concrete walls like a thunderclap. For I am here. A figure muscular beyond belief, draped in American colors, stood at the tunnel entrance. The sludge villain shrieked and lashed out, but the figure moved faster than sight. Texas. Smash! The wind pressure alone was like a hurricane. The sludge was blown apart, splattered across the tunnel walls in a chaotic, messy art piece. Izuku was thrown back, the slime releasing him. He hit the ground hard, gasping for air, coughing up fluid. He looked up, blurry-eyed, to see the towering form of All Might. Are you okay, young man? All Might asked, his grin blindingly bright. He began scooping the scattered sludge into empty soda bottles with impossible speed. Apologies for getting you mixed up in my villain hunting. I got a little distracted in the sewer system. Izuku wiped his mouth with his sleeve. He stood up, his legs shaking. He instinctively straightened his jacket, brushing off the dust. All Might, Izuku wheezed. Indeed. And you are safe. All Might gave a thumbs up. Now I must get this fellow to the police. Wait. Izuku stepped forward. He pulled a notebook from his bag, miraculously undamaged. Please. Sign my. He opened the book. All Might had already signed it. It took up 2 whole pages. Thank you? Izuku bowed deeply, 90 degrees. I will treasure this. It will be a family heirloom. Ha! You're very polite. Well, I'm off. All Might crouched, ready to leap. Wait! Izuku yelled again. The question that had been burning in him, the doubt Bakugo had planted, surged up. All Might. Can a hero who relies on tools, who has to be close to the danger, can he truly stand at the top? All Might paused. He looked at the boy. He saw the high collar, the expensive fabric, the way the boy stood at attention despite trembling. Young man, All Might said, his voice dropping an octave. Pro heroes come in many varieties. But the top? The top is a lonely, heavy place. If you have to be close to danger to work, then you must make sure your spirit is stronger than your armor. Because when you are close, you get hurt. All Might turned away. But without risk, there is no victory. Plus ultra! And with a sonic boom, he was gone. Izuku stood in the silence of the tunnel. It wasn't a rejection. But it wasn't the affirmation he wanted either. Make sure your spirit is stronger than your armor. He looked down at his gakurin. It was stained with sewer water. Father is going to kill me, he whispered. The explosion happened 20 minutes later. Izuku had been wandering the shopping district, trying to find a dry cleaner that could perform a miracle in under an hour, when the ground shook. Smoke billowed from the Tatooine shopping district. Against his better judgment, and against his father's strict rule about rubbernecking, Izuku ran toward the noise. The scene was a nightmare. Flames roared from a wrecked office building. The heroes were being pushed back. Death Arms, Kamui Woods, Empty Lady, none of them could get close. And in the center of the inferno, surrounded by a moat of fire, was the sludge villain. It's him, Izuku breathed, horrified. All Might dropped him. Because of me? Guilt, cold and sharp, pierced his chest. He scanned the scene. Why weren't they attacking? I can't get close. Kamui Wood shouted. The fire is too hot for my wood. And I have no room to maneuver. The villain has a hostage. Someone screamed. Izuku squinted through the smoke. The sludge was writhing, and in the center, a face emerged. Katsuki Bakugo. He wasn't screaming. His mouth was covered. But his eyes, those red eyes, were wide with terror and rage. He was firing explosions wildly, but they only served to fan the flames and scatter the sludge, making it harder to grab him. It's my fault. Izuku's hands clenched at his sides. The heroes are waiting. They're waiting for a better matchup. They're playing it safe. Safe. His father's voice echoed in his head. Elegance. Composure. Don't rush in blindly. But Bakugo looked like he was suffocating. Izuku's eyes darted around. He analyzed the scene. The villain was slippery. Brute force wasn't working. Explosions weren't working. You couldn't punch water. But the villain was holding Bakugo. To hold him, the sludge had to apply pressure. And to apply pressure, it had to wrap around him. Bakugo was wearing his school uniform. The same uniform Izuku wore. High-grade wool blend. Reinforced buttons. Izuku didn't think. Or rather, he thought so fast it looked like instinct. He ducked under the police tape. Hey! Kid! Get back! Death Arms roared. Izuku ignored him. He sprinted toward the fire. The heat was intense, searing his skin, curling the edges of his hair. Don't run blindly. Run with purpose. Izuku dodged a lash of sludge. He didn't try to punch the villain. He didn't try to be All Might. He slid on his knees, tearing his trousers on the asphalt, skidding right into the heart of the danger zone. He came to a stop just inches from the sludge monster. You again? The villain roared. I'll kill you this time. The villain raised a massive glob of slime to crush Izuku. Izuku didn't look at the villain. He looked at Bakugo. He reached out with both hands. He didn't grab Bakugo's arm. He grabbed the fabric of Bakugo's pants leg and his blazer. Focus. Texture, wool. Weave, twill. Tensile strength, high. Let go, Izuku hissed through his teeth. Quirk. Textile manipulation. Izuku pulled. Physically, he barely moved his arms. But mystically, the connection was made. The threads of Bakugo's uniform responded to Izuku's command. Usually, clothes are passive. They drape. They fold. But under Izuku's grip, Bakugo's uniform came alive. The blazer suddenly became rigid, expanding outward like a pufferfish. The fabric stiffened into steel-hard plates, forcing the sludge away from Bakugo's chest. What? The villain recoiled as his grip was forcibly expanded. Kaken! Breathe! Izuku yelled. At the same time, Izuku yanked his hands back. He unspooled the stitching in the shoulder seams of Bakugo's jacket remotely. The thread shot out like razor wire, slicing through the sludge covering Bakugo's mouth. Bakugo gasped, sucking in a lungful of air. Deku? Bakugo coughed. I can't pull you out. Izuku shouted, sweat pouring down his face, his hands trembling from the strain of maintaining the hardness of the cloth. He's too sticky. You have to blow him away from the inside. Don't tell me what to do. Bakugo screamed, tears of frustration in his eyes. But he listened. Bakugo unleashed a massive explosion from his palms, right inside the cavity Izuku had created with the rigid jacket. Boom! The sludge splattered backward. The grip was broken, but the villain wasn't done. The scattered slime coalesced instantly, rising up like a tidal wave above both boys. You little pests! The villain shrieked. Izuku was out of tricks. He was touching Bakugo, but he couldn't fight a liquid wave with a wool jacket. He froze. He squeezed his eyes shut. I'm sorry, father. I wasn't elegant. Wind. A massive gust of wind hit them, but not from the villain. Izuku opened his eyes. All Might stood in front of them, steam rising from his body. He blocked the sludge with his own body, his arms crossed in an X. I really am pathetic, All Might said, his voice straining. Preaching to you about risks, while I stood by and watched a child take them. All Might's fist drew back. Detroit. He punched the air. Smash! The upward pressure changed the weather. A tornado spiraled into the sky, vaporizing the sludge, putting out the fire, and sending clouds swirling into a sudden rainstorm. Izuku and Bakugo were blown back, tumbling over each other on the pavement. Silence fell over the square. Then, the rain began to fall. The aftermath was a lecture. A long, loud lecture. The pro-heroes, Kamui Woods and Death Arms, were surrounding Izuku. Are you insane? Death Arms yelled, pointing a massive finger in Izuku's face. You have no license. You ran into a fire. You could have gotten yourself killed and the hostage killed. You interfered with pro-work. Kamui Woods added. That was reckless endangerment. Izuku stood there, head bowed. He was soaked, his uniform was torn at the knees, covered in soot and slime. He accepted the scolding. They were right. It wasn't proper procedure. However, a third voice cut in. The heroes parted. All Might stood there, in his buff form, surrounded by reporters. But he was looking at Izuku. The heroes are right to scold you for safety, All Might said, his voice booming for the cameras but his eyes gentle. But tell me, young man. Why did you run? Izuku looked up. He trembled. My legs. Izuku whispered. They just moved. And his clothes looked like they were hurting him. The crowd murmured. I see, All Might said. He didn't offer a quirk. He didn't offer a secret. He simply nodded. Good instincts. But refine them. Meanwhile, the heroes were praising Bakugo for his bravery and powerful quirk. Bakugo wasn't listening. He was staring at Izuku. He was staring at the threads of his own jacket, which were currently hanging loose and unraveled where Izuku had manipulated them. As the crowd dispersed and the police took statements, Izuku began the long walk home. He was exhausted. He was dirty. He was definitely grounded. Deku! Izuku flinched and turned around. Bakugo was running after him. He looked furious. Kaken? Bakugo stopped a few feet away, panting. I didn't ask for your help. And you didn't save me. I know, Izuku said softly, but... Bakugo gritted his teeth. He looked at his torn jacket again. You didn't just stand there. You used my own clothes against me. You made me a weapon. Izuku blinked. I just reinforced the weave. Shut up with the nerd talk. Bakugo yelled. He turned around, hands in his pockets. I don't owe you anything. But, you aren't a mannequin. Mannequins don't bleed. Bakugo stomped off. Izuku stood there stunned. It wasn't a thank you. But it was an acknowledgement. The Hakamata estate was quiet when Izuku entered. He tried to sneak in. He really did. He took off his shoes silently. He crept toward the stairs. Izuku froze. Best Jeanist was sitting in the living room armchair, legs crossed. The television was on. It was replaying the news footage. The headline read, Middle schooler charges sludge villain. All Might saves the day. The footage was zoomed in. It showed Izuku sliding on his knees. It showed him grabbing Bakugo. It showed the desperate, messy, frantic look on Izuku's face. Izuku turned slowly. He looked like a wreck. His expensive pants were ruined. His shirt was gray with ash. His hair was matted. I'm sorry, Izuku said, his voice cracking. I lost my composure. I was messy. I was reckless. I disgraced the name. Jeanist stood up. He walked over to Izuku. The hero's face was unreadable. He circled Izuku slowly, inspecting the damage. He touched the torn knee of the trousers. He touched the soot on the cheek. You ran into a fire, Jeanist said. Yes. You engaged a villain that defeated 3 pros. Yes. And you used the binding cloth technique on a civilian's uniform to create a pressurized cavity. Izuku blinked. Yes. Jeanist stopped in front of him. He looked down. Your posture was terrible, Jeanist said. You slid on your knees like a baseball player. You ruined a 12,000 yen pair of trousers. Izuku closed his eyes, waiting for the punishment. But Jeanist continued, his voice softer than Izuku had ever heard it. You saw a frayed edge in society, and you moved to stitch it back together. Izuku opened his eyes. Jeanist reached out. He didn't fix Izuku's collar this time. He placed a hand on top of Izuku's head, ruffling the messy, dirty curls. Style is important, Izuku. But style without substance is just vanity. Today, you had substance. You were not elegant. You were raw. And it was effective. Tears welled up in Izuku's eyes. Go shower, Jeanist said, stepping back and resuming his strict posture. Dispose of that uniform. We will have to order a new one. And tomorrow, We begin training on tensile strength limits. If you are going to use other people's clothes as weapons, you need to know their breaking points so you don't accidentally strangle the people you are saving. Izuku wiped his eyes, a broad, watery smile breaking across his face. Yes, sir. Thank you, father. Go. You smell like a sewer. Izuku ran up the stairs, his heart lighter than air. He wasn't All Might. He wasn't best jeanist. He was something in between. He sat on his bed, looking at his hands. He flexed his fingers. Invisible threads seemed to dance between them. Air to the fiber, he thought. He grabbed a fresh notebook. He turned to a new page. At the top, he didn't write All Might. He wrote, Hero Name Idea? He tapped the pen against his chin. He looked at the spool of thread on his desk. Strong. Flexible. Holding things together from the inside. He smiled. I have a lot of work to do before UA. Izuku Midoriya closed the book, turned off the light, and for the first time in years, slept without dreaming of being someone else. The philosophy of the Hakamata Agency was etched into glass above the reception desk, visible to anyone who walked through the automatic doors. Heroism is the art of weaving order from chaos. For 14 years, Izuku Midoriya had read those words. He had traced them in his mind. But now, standing in the center of the agency's private training dojo, a vast, white room with high ceilings and walls lined with spools of industrial-grade carbon fiber, the words felt less like a motto and more like a threat. Again, the voice commanded. Izuku stood in the center of the room, his chest heaving. Sweat dripped from his nose, darkening the collar of his training gi. His hands were trembling, his fingers raw and red. Across the room stood his father, Tsunaga Hakamata, best jeanist. He was immaculate, as always. Even during training, he wore a modified version of his hero costume, his denim collar rising high enough to obscure his expression, leaving only his sharp, critical eyes visible. Father, my fingers. Izuku started, his voice rasping. Your fingers are tools, Izuku. Just as a swordsman must callous his palms, a fiber master must condition his extremities. The villain will not pause because you have a cramp. The collapsing building will not stop falling because you have a blister. Again, jeanist raised a hand. From the walls, 5 distinct spools of wire shot out, aiming for the target dummies set up around the room. Bind them, jeanist ordered. Simultaneously. Tension 40%. Speed maximum. Do not let the wires touch the floor. Izuku gritted his teeth. He slammed his palms together, activating his quirk, textile manipulation. Unlike his father, who could command fibers telekinetically with a thought, Izuku was a conductor. He needed a connection. He needed a bridge. He threw his hands out, shooting strands of his own reinforced capture tape from the dispensers on his wrists, a support item he had spent the last 2 months engineering. The tape hit the incoming wires. Connect. The sensation hit his brain like a plucked guitar string. He could feel the twist of the metal, the weight of the copper, the drag of the air. Seize! Izuku yelled. He yanked his arms back, crossing them over his chest. The wires obeyed, diverting from their paths. They lashed out like snakes, wrapping around the dummies. Snap! 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 3 dummies were bound perfectly, their arms pinned to their sides. The 4th wire missed, slicing the dummy's head off instead of binding it. The 5th wire tangled with the 3rd, creating a messy knot that dropped to the floor with a clang. Silence filled the dojo. Izuku dropped to his knees, gasping for air. The mental strain of controlling 5 distinct vectors was like trying to solve 5 calculus equations at once while sprinting. Jeanist walked forward, his boots clicking on the polished floor. He inspected the dummies. He touched the headless one. Decapitation is not a rescue technique, Izuku, Jeanist said coolly. If this were a hostage situation, you would have just killed the victim while saving the villain. I lost the tension on the left side, Izuku wheezed, looking at his shaking hands. The drag coefficient changed when the air conditioning kicked on. I didn't adjust fast enough. Jeanist moved to the knot on the floor. He picked it up with 2 fingers, looking at it with disdain. And this? A Gordian knot? Sloppy. A hero's work must be seamless. If you bind a villain with a mess like this, they will laugh at you before they break free. Chaos breeds failure. Order breeds success. Jeanist turned to his son. For a moment, the stern facade cracked. He saw the boy on the floor, small, exhausted, pushing himself beyond the limit because he was terrified of being just a legacy hire. Jeanist sighed, the sound muffled by his collar. Stand up, Izuku. Izuku forced himself to his feet. I can go again. I can fix it. No. That is enough for physical conditioning today, Jeanist said. He walked over to a sleek metal table and picked up a towel, tossing it to Izuku. You have the power, Izuku. Your quirk is robust, but your mind is noisy. Izuku wiped his face. Noisy? You overthink, Jeanist said, tapping his own temple. I see you calculating. You analyze the wind, the weight, the material. That is your strength, yes, but in the moment of action, analysis must become instinct. You are trying to manually drive a car that should be automatic. You must feel the fiber, not just understand it. Jeanist turned and walked toward the exit. Shower. Then report to the design studio. We need to discuss the tensile strength of the polymer weave for your UA entrance exam costume. If you are going to act like a brute, you at least need a suit that won't tear. Izuku watched his father leave. He looked down at his hands again. They were scarred with tiny white lines from wire cuts, the marks of his trade. Feel it, Izuku whispered to himself. He reached out and touched the messy knot on the floor. He closed his eyes. He didn't think about the physics. He just felt the tangle. With a flick of his wrist, the knot unraveled, the wire straightening out into a perfect line. I can do this, he said. I have to. 5 months later, the morning of the exam, the morning of the UA entrance exam was crisp and cold. The sky was a piercing blue, the kind that demanded clarity. Izuku stood in the foyer of the Hakamata estate. The training was over. The 10 months of hell, of running upstairs with spools of lead cable, of memorizing the weave patterns of every major textile on Earth, of dodging his father's relentless fiber attacks, had led to this. He looked in the mirror. He wasn't the scrawny boy from the sludge incident anymore. He had filled out. His shoulders were broader, his posture straighter. The nervous energy was still there, buzzing under his skin, but it was contained. He wasn't wearing his middle school uniform. He was wearing his practical exam gear, approved by the UA regulations as non-support item clothing. It was a tracksuit, but calling it a tracksuit was an insult to the Hakamata brand. It was a deep forest green, tailored to fit like a second skin. The fabric was a high-density ballistic nylon blend, resistant to tearing and heat. High-top sneakers with reinforced soles. And, of course, a high collar that rose to his chin. You look ready, a voice said. Izuku turned. Jeanist was there, holding a bento box wrapped in a denim cloth. Father, Izuku bowed. I will do my best. Do not do your best, Izuku, Jeanist corrected, handing him the lunch. Do what is required. Excellence is not an effort, it is a state of being. He reached out and adjusted the zipper on Izuku's chest, pulling it up an inch. Remember the 3 pillars I taught you, Jeanist recited. Awareness. Connection. Tension, Izuku responded instantly. Correct. You are not All Might. You cannot punch your way through a wall. You must find the loose thread in the wall and pull it until the wall falls down on its own. Be smart. Be elegant. Jeanist stepped back. He didn't hug him. That wasn't their way. But he gave a sharp nod. Go. And do not bring shame to the denim. I won't, Izuku said. As he walked out the door, he felt a strange sensation. It wasn't fear. It was the heavy, crushing weight of expectation. He wasn't just Izuku Midoriya. He was the heir to the fiber. And today, the world would see if the fabric held or tore. The UA gates, the massive glass structures of UA High glittered in the sun like a fortress of dreams. Students from all over the country swarmed the entrance, a kaleidoscope of strange mutations and confident walks. Izuku walked through the crowd, his eyes scanning everything. That guy has extendable fingers. Good for range, bad for durability. That girl has engine calves. Speed type. High torque, he was muttering. He couldn't help it. It was how he processed the chaos. Out of my way, Deku. The growl came from behind him. Izuku didn't flinch. He sidestepped smoothly to the left, allowing Katsuki Bakugo to stomp past. Bakugo looked volatile. He wasn't wearing a fancy suit. He was wearing baggy pants and a tank top, looking like he was ready for a street fight. "Good morning, Kaken," Izuku said evenly. "Don't talk to me," Bakugo spat, not looking back. "I'm not here to make friends. I'm here to crush this exam and leave you in the dust." Izuku watched him go. Their relationship had been strange since the sludge incident. Bakugo had stopped bullying him physically, but the verbal hostility had sharpened. It was as if Bakugo was offended that Izuku had dared to try and save him. Izuku took a breath and stepped forward, and immediately tripped over his own shoelace. Disaster. The first step, and I'm already failing the posture check. He braced for the impact, squeezing his eyes shut. But he didn't hit the pavement. He felt the lightness. His feet floated off the ground. Whoa! Careful there. Izuku opened his eyes. He was hovering upside down. A round-faced girl with brown hair was smiling at him, her fingertips pressed together. "Are you okay?" she asked, cheerful and bright. "It's bad luck to trip on the first day. I prefer to stick the landing." She tapped his chest, and gravity returned. Izuku landed gracefully, bending his knees to absorb the shock, a reflex drilled into him by months of falling from wires. "Thank you," Izuku said, straightening his jacket immediately. "Quirk, zero gravity? Or mass negation?" The girl blinked, surprised. "Oh. Zero gravity. I'm Ochako Uraraka. Izuku Midoriya," he bowed. "Your control is impressive. To negate the gravitational pull on a moving object without causing nausea requires precise inner-ear equilibrium manipulation." Uraraka stared at him. Then she laughed. "You're funny. And you dress so fancy. Are you going to a wedding after this?" Izuku flushed beneath his collar. "This is standard operational attire for mobility and protection." "Well, good luck, Mr. Fancy." She waved and ran off toward the entrance. Izuku stood there for a second. "She called me funny." He checked his pulse. Elevated. Focus, Izuku. Awareness. Connection. Tension. The orientation. The auditorium was dark, lit only by the spotlight on President Mike. The voice hero was screaming about the rules of the practical exam. 3 robots. 1 pointers, 2 pointers, 3 pointers. Destroy them, earn cash. I mean points. Izuku sat perfectly still, his notebook open, taking notes in rapid shorthand. Robots. Metal chassis. Exposed wiring likely at the joints for articulation. Hydraulic systems. Weaknesses, joint manipulation, sensor blinding, internal circuitry overload. "Excuse me." A hand shot up in the middle of the auditorium. It was a tall boy with glasses and a severe haircut. "May I ask a question?" The boy boomed. "The pamphlet says there are 4 types of robots. If this is a misprint, you should be ashamed. We are here for the top hero education in Japan." He then spun around and pointed a rigid finger directly at Izuku. "And you? With the curly hair and the high collar." Izuku froze. The spotlight seemed to shift to him. "You've been muttering this entire time. It's distracting. If you're here to critique the presentation like a fashion journalist, then leave immediately." The auditorium snickered. Izuku felt the heat rise in his cheeks. He stood up. He didn't shrink. Jeanist's voice echoed in his ear. When challenged, stand your ground. Silence is an admission of guilt. "My apologies for the noise," Izuku said, his voice projecting clearly, though his hands shook slightly. "However, I was not critiquing the fashion. I was analyzing the potential structural weaknesses of the robotic opponents based on the silhouette shown on the screen. Strategy is as important as power. I assumed everyone else was doing the same." The silence in the room shifted. It went from mocking to stunned. The boy with glasses blinked, taken aback. "I see. You are already strategizing." I apologize for my assumption." President Mike broke the tension. Okay. Listen up, listeners. The 4th robot is a 0-pointer. It's just an obstacle. Like a thunderstorm or a bad date. Avoid it. Izuku sat down, exhaling slowly. "Strategy is as important as power," he repeated to himself. "I have to believe that." Battle Center B. The mock city was enormous. Skyscrapers, streets, streetlights. It was a perfect replica of an urban war zone. Izuku stood at the gate of Battle Center B. He was surrounded by other examinees. Some were stretching. Some were hyping themselves up. He saw the girl, Uraraka, near the front. She looked nervous. He also saw the boy with glasses, Ida, revving his engines. Izuku looked at his own setup. He had 2 specialized spools of high-tensile wire hidden in the reinforced pockets of his tracksuit. He had gloves with friction pads. I can't smash them, Izuku thought. I have to dismantle them. And start. President Mick's voice blared from the tower. Most students hesitated. Izuku didn't. Awareness. He sprinted. Not blindly, but with his eyes scanning the verticality. There are no countdowns in real battles. Run! Run! The crowd surged behind him, but Izuku had the lead. He turned a corner onto the main street and stopped. A one-pointer, a wheeled drone with a single red eye, rolled toward him, targeting lasers locking on. Target acquired, the robot droned. Izuku didn't punch. He waited. The robot lunged. Izuku slid underneath it. As he slid, his hand brushed the exposed hydraulic cable on the robot's undercarriage. Connection. Quirk. Textile manipulation. He didn't need to control the metal. He controlled the sheathing around the wires. It was a synthetic weave. Unravel, Izuku whispered. He yanked the synthetic weave. The protective coating on the robot's internal wiring stripped away instantly. The wires touched. Spark. The robot short-circuited, jerking violently before collapsing into a heap of smoking metal. 1 point, Izuku panted, scrambling to his feet. It worked. It was slower than a punch, but it was efficient. He kept moving. A 3-pointer burst through a wall to his right, a massive, scorpion-like machine. It raised a tail to strike. Izuku couldn't get close enough to touch the wiring without getting skewered. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a spool of his own wire. He threw the weighted end over a streetlight arm above the robot. The wire looped over the bar. Izuku caught the end. Now he had a pulley. Hey! He yelled at the robot. The 3-pointer turned. Izuku sprinted away from it, holding the wire. The robot chased. Izuku ran toward a narrow alleyway. He jumped, while running up the side of the building, a move that cost him 3 weeks of bruises to learn. As the robot followed, Izuku pulled the wire taut across the alley entrance. Tension. The robot plowed into the wire at full speed. Because Izuku was channeling his quirk through the wire, it didn't snap. It became as hard as diamond. The wire sliced through the robot's front sensor array and caught its front legs. The momentum did the rest. The robot flipped over, crashing upside down, its wheels spinning uselessly in the air. Izuku landed on the robot's chassis. He placed his hand on the central joint. Fabric sheath. Twist. He crushed the internal cabling. The robot died. 4 points. He was doing it. He was actually doing it. But he was slow. Explosions echoed in the distance. He could hear Bakugo laughing maniacally from another battle center. He could see others blasting robots apart with lasers and acid. I need more efficiency, Izuku thought, sweat stinging his eyes. I can't fight them one by one. He ran into a central plaza. It was chaos. Robots were everywhere. Izuku spotted a cluster of 2-pointers. He didn't engage them. He engaged the environment. He ran to a construction site on the corner. A heavy tarp covered a stack of pipes. Izuku grabbed the corner of the tarp. Expand! He pumped his quirk into the massive sheet of canvas. It rippled, obeying his command. He whipped it like a whip crack, sending the tarp flying over the group of 3 robots. As soon as the canvas covered them, Izuku clenched his fist. Bind! The tarp shrank. The fibers contracted with thousands of pounds of force. The canvas wrapped around the robots, crushing their limbs together, blinding their sensors. They crashed into each other, a heap of struggling metal. Izuku rushed in, tapping each one to disable them manually. 6, 8, 10 points. He checked his watch. 5 minutes left. He had 28 points. It wasn't enough. The average cutoff was usually around 40 or 50. His breath was coming in ragged gasps. His fingers were starting to ache, a deep, throbbing pain in the joints. Overuse. Keep going. Don't fray. He turned a corner and saw the boy with glasses, Ida. He was dismantling robots with high-speed kicks. He was efficient, powerful. Izuku felt a pang of jealousy. Raw power. It's so much easier. No. Elegance. Precision. Izuku found his rhythm. He used the steel cables inside a fallen telephone pole to trip a three-pointer. He used the elastic waistband of a destroyed robot. Don't ask why robots had waistbands. To slingshot debris into a sensor eye. 45 points. He was safe. Probably. 2 minutes remaining, and then the ground shook. It wasn't a rumble. It was an earthquake. From the center of the city, a shadow eclipsed the sun. The zero-pointer. It was colossal. Bigger than the buildings. Its tread crushed the pavement like it was styrofoam. It swiped a massive arm, demolishing an entire office block. Debris rained down like meteors. That's not an obstacle. A student screamed. That's a monster. Panic. The examinees broke. They turned and ran. It was the logical choice. There were no points for fighting it. Izuku turned to run too. His legs were screaming. His quirk reserves were low. Run. Live to fight another day. Ow! A small voice. Izuku stopped. He looked back. Amidst the rubble, directly in the path of the zero-pointer, was the girl. Uraraka. Her leg was trapped under a massive chunk of concrete. She was struggling, but the robot was closing in. The other students were fleeing. They didn't see her. Or they were too scared. The zero-pointer raised a foot. It was going to crush her. Izuku's mind went blank. Jeanist's voice vanished. The strategy vanished. The points vanished. There was no elegance in what happened next. Izuku sprinted toward the robot. I can't smash it. I can't lift it. It weighs hundreds of tons. He looked at the environment. 2 tall buildings flanked the street where the robot was stepping. He reached into his pockets. He grabbed both spools of his high-tensile wire. He didn't just pull the ends, he ripped the entire casings off. He jumped. He didn't use one for all. He used his own trained muscles. He vaulted off a piece of rubble, grabbed a protruding pipe on the left building, and swung up. Hey! Over here! He screamed, trying to draw the robot's eye. The robot ignored him. The foot began to descend. Izuku slapped his hand against the wall of the building. He wasn't touching fabric. But there were cables inside the wall. Electrical wiring. Internet lines. Connect. It was faint. It was buried under concrete. But he felt the thread. Come out! He ripped his hand back. The wall exploded outward as dozens of heavy cables burst free, answering his call. Izuku grabbed them, twisting them together with his own wire spools. He created a massive, chaotic braid of copper, steel, and carbon fiber. He leaped across the street to the building on the opposite side. It was a suicide jump. He barely made it, slamming into a balcony. He slapped the other wall. He summoned the cables from that building too. He fused them. He had created a tripwire. A massive, thick cable spanning the street, right at the ankle height of the zero-pointer. Hold! Izuku screamed. He pumped every last ounce of his energy into the cable. He reinforced the weave. He hardened the copper. He made the cable rigid. The zero-pointer's shin hit the cable. If Izuku had been weak, the cable would have snapped. But Izuku was the son of best jeanist. He held the tension. Screech! The sound of metal on metal was deafening. The robot's forward momentum was checked. The massive machine tripped. It pitched forward, missing Uraraka by inches, and crashed face first into the street with a force that shattered windows for 3 blocks. The shockwave knocked Izuku off the balcony. He fell. He tried to shoot a wire to catch himself, but his hands were numb. His quirk sputtered and died. I'm falling. I saved her. I'm going to hit the ground. Slap. A hand grabbed his face. He stopped in midair, inches from the pavement. I got you! Uraraka wheezed. She was floating on a piece of debris, her face pale, holding on to him. She released him, and they both collapsed onto the ground. Time's up, the siren wailed. Izuku lay on his back, staring at the sky. His hands were bleeding. His expensive tracksuit was shredded. He couldn't feel his fingers. That? Izuku whispered, a hysterical laugh bubbling up in his chest. That was definitely not elegant. The aftermath. The infirmary smelled of antiseptic and gummy bears. You really did a number on yourself, Sonny, recovery girl clucked, wrapping bandages around Izuku's fingers. Muscle spasms, friction burns, and exhaustion. You use your quirk like a sledgehammer. I had to, Izuku murmured. Here. She kissed his forehead. He felt his stamina drain, but the pain in his hands faded to a dull throb. You're lucky. No permanent nerve damage, but you need to learn that not every problem is a nail to be hammered. Izuku looked at his bandaged hands. I failed. I didn't destroy the 0-pointer. I just tripped it. And I stopped hunting points to do it. I probably didn't get enough. Recovery girl smiled enigmatically. Well, that's up to the judges, isn't it? Now shoo. I have other patients. Izuku walked out of the school. The sun was setting. He saw Ida at the gate. The tall boy looked at Izuku, then bowed stiffly. You, Ida said? You saw that the practical exam had a hidden component, didn't you? Hidden component? Izuku blinked. The rescue. I was so focused on the objective, I ignored the girl. But you moved without hesitation. You sacrificed your score to save her. Ida shook his head. I misjudged you. You are a true superior candidate. Ida walked away. Izuku stood there. Superior? I have 45 points. That's borderline at best. When he got home, the house was quiet. Jeanist was in the living room, reading a fashion magazine. He didn't look up when Izuku entered. You're late, Jeanist said. I had to see recovery girl. Jeanist lowered the magazine. He saw the bandages. He saw the ruined tracksuit. Did you pass? I don't know, Izuku admitted. I tripped the 0-pointer. Jeanist's eyebrow raised. Tripped it? It was going to crush a girl. I made a tripwire between two buildings using the internal cabling of the structures. It worked, but it was messy. And I stopped getting points to do it. Jeanist stared at him for a long, agonizing minute. Then, he closed the magazine. You used the internal structure of the city to incapacitate a foe larger than yourself? Yes. And you prioritized the safety of a civilian over the accumulation of glory? Yes. Jeanist stood up. He walked over to a cabinet and pulled out a bottle of sparkling water. He poured 2 glasses. He handed one to Izuku. That sounds, Jeanist said, taking a sip, like a very practical application of style. He didn't smile. But the tension in the room vanished. The letter. 1 week later, the letter arrived. Izuku sat at his desk, the envelope staring at him. He was shaking. Just open it, Izuku, Jeanist said from the doorway. He was leaning against the frame, arms crossed. Izuku tore the envelope. A metal disc fell out. A hologram projected onto the wall. I am here. All Might's face filled the room. All Might? Izuku gasped. But this is from Yue. I am here as a projection. And as a teacher. Surprise! All Might laughed. Young Midoriya. You have been through the ringer. I saw your written exam, stellar marks. But the practical, the practical, Izuku's heart sank. You scored 45 villain points. A respectable score. But is that enough? For the prestigious Yue? Maybe. Maybe not. The video shifted. It showed a clip. It was Uraraka, standing in front of President Mike. Please! Can I give my points to the boy with the high collar? He saved me. He risked everything. Izuku's eyes widened. You cannot give points away. All Might's voice boomed. But a hero course that rejects those who save others is a sham. This is a job of saving lives. The screen flashed. Rescue points, 60. Izuku Midoriya. 60 rescue points. Plus your 45 villain points. A grand total of 105. You pass with flying colors. In fact, you took the second highest score in the exam. The video showed the scoreboard. 1. Katsuki Bakugo 77 villains/0 rescue. 2. Izuku Midoriya 45 villains/60 rescue. Come, young Midoriya. All Might reached a hand out toward the camera. This is your hero academia. The hologram faded. Izuku sat in silence. Tears streamed down his face. He didn't wipe them away. He felt a hand on his shoulder. 105 points, jeanist said quietly. Acceptable. Izuku laughed, a wet, choking sound. Just acceptable? Well, jeanist said, turning to leave, a hint of a smirk on his face. Your tie is crooked. Izuku looked down. It was. He reached up, his bandaged fingers clumsy, and straightened the knot. He looked at his reflection in the dark window. He was going to UA. He wasn't just a thread anymore. He was part of the tapestry. The blazer of UA High School was a masterpiece of standard-issue tailoring, but to the trained eye of a Hakamata, it was riddled with imperfections. Izuku Midoriya stood before the entryway mirror, his hands hovering over the gray fabric. It was a polyester wool blend, durable, stain-resistant, but lacking the breathability of natural fibers. The shoulder seams were a millimeter too wide for his frame, creating a microscopic drag that would, in theory, reduce his aerodynamic efficiency by 0.04%. Stop fidgeting, Izuku. Best Jeanist walked past him, holding a travel mug of espresso. The number 3 hero was dressed for patrol, denim pulled tight, collar high, eyes sharp. The shoulder seam is off, Izuku muttered, pinching the fabric. It is a school uniform, not a hero costume, Jeanist replied, pausing to inspect his son. However, your tie knot is impeccable. The Trinity knot. Bold. Symmetrical. It commands respect. Izuku dropped his hands to his sides, snapping to attention. Thank you, father. Today is the first fitting of your new life, Jeanist said, his voice dropping into that lecture tone Izuku knew so well. You are entering a weave of different threads. Some will be silk, soft and yielding. Some will be burlap, rough and abrasive. Your job is not to change them, but to find how you fit into the pattern without losing your own texture. I understand. And Izuku? Yes? Do not let your classmates touch your hair. Humidity is high today. You'll frizz if disturbed. Izuku managed a weak smile. I'll do my best. The Golden Gates. The commute to UA was a trial in itself. Public transport was a chaotic tapestry of humanity, and Izuku, conditioned to observe textiles, found himself mentally cataloging the fabrics of every passenger on the train. Cheap rayon. Pilling cotton. Is that velvet in April? Bold choice. When he stepped off at the station, the atmosphere changed. The students walking up the hill toward the massive glass gates of UA carried themselves differently. There was ambition in their strides. Izuku walked with a practiced gait, spine straight, chin parallel to the ground, arms swinging in a controlled rhythm. He ignored the whispers. Hey, isn't that? Yeah, best jeanist kid. Look at the way he walks. He thinks he owns the place. He scored second in the practical, I heard. Right behind the explosion guy. Izuku tightened his jaw. He didn't think he owned the place. He was just terrified that if he slouched, someone would take a photo and send it to his father. He navigated the labyrinthine hallways of the main building until he found it. A massive door, easily 10 feet tall, painted with a bold red 1A. This is it. The hero course. He took a deep breath, checked his tie one last time, and slid the door open. Don't put your feet on the desk. The shout hit him instantly. Ha! Izuku froze. The scene before him was a clash of textures. On one side was the boy with glasses from the entrance exam, Tenya Ida. He was chopping the air with his hands stiff and rigid. On the other side, leaning back in his chair with his feet crossed on the desk, was Katsuki Bakugo. Don't you think that's rude to the UA upperclassmen and the people who made the desk? Ida demanded. Nope, Bakugo sneered. What junior high did you go to, you side character? I attended semi-private academy. My name is Tenya Ida. Sama? So you're a damn elite, huh? Looks like I'll have fun crushing you. Crushing me? You're terrible. Do you really wish to be a hero? Izuku stepped into the room. The sound of his loafers clicking on the floor drew their attention. Ah! Ida spun around. You! The entire class turned to look. Izuku stood in the doorway, the morning sunlight framing him. He looked immaculate. His uniform was pressed. His hair was styled, despite the humidity. He clutched his bag with gloved hands, fingerless compression gloves he wore to protect his hands from friction burns. Good morning, Izuku said, bowing precisely 30 degrees. Ida marched over to him. I am Tenya Ida. I must apologize for the entrance exam. I misjudged you completely. You perceived the true nature of the test, while I was blinded by the surface rules. I hate to admit it, but you are the superior student. I didn't perceive anything, Izuku said, waving his hands slightly, dropping the persona for a second. I just acted, and that makes it more impressive. Ida boomed. TCH. Bakugo glared at Izuku from his desk. Don't get a big head, Deku. You just got lucky with a gimmick. Luck is part of the equation, Kaken, Izuku replied, his voice shifting back to the cool, leveled tone he used with Bakugo. But preparation maximizes luck. Bakugo's eyes narrowed. He hated that tone. He hated that Izuku didn't stutter around him anymore. He hated the polish. Hey! It's the messy-haired boy. Izuku turned to see Ochako Uraraka beaming at him in the doorway. You made it. I mean, of course you did. Your rescue points must have been huge. She bounced on her heels. And look at you. You look so official. Like a little businessman. Izuku felt the heat rise to his ears. Well, thank you, Uraraka-san. You look aerodynamic. Aerodynamic? She laughed. That's a new one. If you're here to make friends, pack up and leave. The voice came from the floor. The class froze. Lying in the doorway, wrapped in a yellow sleeping bag like a demented caterpillar, was a man. He looked exhausted. His hair was a mess of black tangles, his eyes were bloodshot, and he was sucking on a jelly pouch. He stood up, shedding the sleeping bag. He wore all black. Loose, baggy clothes. A scarf that looked like bandages. Eraserhead, Izuku's mind supplied instantly. Underground hero. Specializes in ambush and nullification. Costume emphasizes function over form. Fabric looks to be a carbon nanofiber weave, likely for capturing. It took you 8 seconds to quiet down, the man muttered. Time is limited. You kids aren't rational enough. He reached into his sleeping bag and pulled out a stack of blue gym uniforms. I'm your homeroom teacher, Shota Aizawa. Put these on and meet me on the grounds. The locker room. The boys' locker room was a flurry of activity. Man, that teacher is intense. A boy with red, spiked hair said as he pulled off his shirt. I'm Eijiro Kurishima. Nice to meet you guys. Denki Kaminari, a blond boy with a black streak in his hair said, leaning against the locker. He looked at Izuku. Hey, you're the jeanist kid, right? Midoriya? Izuku was neatly folding his blazer. He placed it on the hanger, smoothed the lapels, and hung it in his locker. He then began unbuttoning his shirt from the bottom up. Yes, Izuku said. It is a pleasure to meet you. Is it true your dad irons his jeans while he's wearing them? Kaminari asked. Izuku paused. Only in emergencies. It is a dangerous technique. The room went silent. They couldn't tell if he was joking. You guys are so lucky. A very small boy with purple grapes on his head drooled. The girls are changing next door. The mysteries of the female form. Izuku ignored him, focusing on the gym uniform Aizawa had provided. He frowned. It was loose. The standard UAP uniform was designed for comfort and mass production. Elastic waistband. Baggy sleeves. Disaster, Izuku thought. Loose fabric creates drag. It creates handles for opponents. It catches on debris. He pulled the pants on. They bunched at the ankles. He reached into his bag and pulled out a small sewing kit, a travel set his father insisted he carry. Whoa, dude, Kirishima blinked. What are you doing? Modifying, Izuku muttered. He sat on the bench. With a speed that bordered on supernatural, Izuku pulled a few threads on the hem of the pants. He tightened the ankle cuffs, using a hidden drawstring technique to secure them flush against his skin. He then rolled the sleeves of the jacket, and used a quick stitch to pin them in place, ensuring his forearms were exposed for his quirk usage. Is that allowed? A boy with elbows shaped like tape dispensers asked. The prompt was put these on, Izuku said, snapping the thread with his teeth. It did not specify as is. A hero must adapt his equipment to his needs. He stood up. The uniform now fit him perfectly. It wasn't tight, but it was contained. No flapping fabric. Bakugo slammed his locker shut. Stop showing off, you damn nerd, Bakugo growled, stalking out of the room. It's not showing off, Izuku whispered to the empty space Bakugo left behind. It's standard procedure. The assessment. The sun beat down on the P grounds. Class 1A stood in a cluster, looking confused. A quirk apprehension test? The class shouted in unison. What about the entrance ceremony? The orientation? Uraraka asked. If you're going to become a hero, you don't have time for such leisurely events, Aizawa deadpanned. He looked at them with tired, bored eyes. UA's selling point is freedom of campus style. That applies to the teachers as well. He held up a softball. Bakugo. You finished first in the entrance exam. In junior high, what was your best result for the softball throw? 67 meters, Bakugo grunted. Try doing it with your quirk. Bakugo stepped into the circle. He stretched his arms, a feral grin spreading across his face. Die! Boom! The explosion was massive. The ball shot into the sky like a missile, leaving a trail of smoke. Aizawa held up a device. 705.2 meters. The class gasped. Awesome! We can use our quirks as much as we want. This looks like fun! Aizawa's expression darkened. The air temperature seemed to drop. Fun? You have 3 years to become a hero. Will you have an attitude like that the whole time? He smiled, a wide, predatory grin that didn't reach his eyes. All right. Whoever comes in last place in all 8 tests will be judged to have no potential, and will be punished with expulsion. The mood shattered instantly. Expulsion? Uraraka cried. But it's the first day. That's not fair. Natural disasters aren't fair, Aizawa countered. Villain attacks aren't fair. Our job is to correct the unfairness. If you wanted to hang out at a burger joint, you went to the wrong school. Izuku swallowed hard. His throat felt dry. Last place gets expelled. He looked at his classmates. Bakugo with his explosions. Ida with his engines. Uraraka with gravity. Izuku had textile manipulation. A quirk that required material, preparation, and creativity. In a raw physical test, he was at a severe disadvantage. I can't be last. I can't fail father. I can't fail myself. Test 1, 50-meter dash. Izuku was paired against Bakugo. On your mark, the robot camera droned. Izuku crouched. He didn't have propulsion. He couldn't explode forward, but he had his uniform. He placed his hands on his thighs. Connect. He channeled his quirk into the fabric of his pants. He tightened the weave in his quadriceps and calves, creating a compression spring effect. He turned his clothes into an external muscle system. Get set. Tighten. Store potential energy. Go! Bakugo blasted off, using explosions behind him to fly. Izuku released the tension. His pants snapped straight, throwing his legs forward with mechanically enhanced force. He sprinted. He kept his arms tight to his body to minimize drag. He focused on the rhythm of the fabric expanding and contracting, aiding his muscles. 3.04 seconds. The robot announced for Bakugo. Izuku crossed the line. 5.58 seconds, he panted, releasing the quirk. It was fast, much faster than his middle school time of 7 seconds. But compared to Ida, 3.04, or Bakugo, it was average. TCH. Slow, Bakugo muttered as he walked past. Test 2, grip strength. Izuku held the dynamometer. If I use my hand, I'll get 40 kilograms. Maybe 50 kilograms. He looked at the device. He looked at his glove. He unraveled a thread from his glove and wrapped it around the handle of the device, layering it quickly. Constrict. He squeezed his hand, but he also commanded the thread to tighten. The fiber cut into the plastic handle, squeezing with the force of hydraulic wire. Beep. 180 kilograms. Not bad. He looked over. A massive boy with multiple arms, Shoji, got 540 kilograms. Izuku sighed. Versatility, not raw power. Keep up. Test 3, standing long jump. This was where he could shine. Izuku stepped to the line. He looked at the sandpit. He extended his arms. From the dispensers under his sleeves, hidden in his modifications, he shot out 2 lines of capture tape. They adhered to the ground far past the sandpit. He gripped the tape. Tension high. Elasticity medium. He pulled back, turning his body into a slingshot. Release. He launched himself into the air, flying over the sandpit entirely, and landing gracefully on the grass beyond. Cleared the sandbox, Aizawa noted, marking his clipboard. Creative application. Test 4, repeated side steps. Izuku used threads to anchor his ankles, creating a rebound effect that allowed him to bounce back and forth without losing balance. He moved like a metronome. It was good. But Mineta, the great boy, was bouncing off his own balls like a pinball. Everyone here is a monster, Izuku realized. Test 5, ball throw. This was the hurdle. Uraraka stepped up and threw the ball. It floated. And floated. Infinity, Aizawa showed the device. The class cheered. Izuku felt sick. Midoriya, Aizawa called. Izuku walked to the circle. He held the ball. It was standard leather and rubber. I can't throw this 700 meters. I don't have super strength. He looked at his sleeve. He had reinforced the stitching earlier. Strategy. The jeanist catapult. He could use his entire jacket as a torsion spring. If he anchored his feet with threads into the ground, and then twisted his upper body while tightening the fibers of his shirt across his back and arm, he wound up. He felt the fabric scream under the tension. He was pushing the material to its absolute limit. 100% tension. Smash! Izuku yelled, a habit he picked up from All Might videos. He threw his arm forward, but the fabric didn't snap. The power didn't come. The ball merely plopped out of his hand and rolled a pathetic 40 meters. Wah! Izuku looked at his shirt. It was loose. The tension was gone. His quirk wasn't working. He looked up. Aizawa was staring at him. His hair was floating, defying gravity. His eyes glowed a piercing red. I erased your quirk, Aizawa said, his voice dry and harsh. The erasure hero. Eraserhead, Izuku whispered. Aizawa stepped closer. The scarf around his neck seemed to writhe like a living thing. That entrance exam was definitely not rational enough, Aizawa said. Even a kid like you was accepted. A kid like me? I saw the footage, Aizawa said. You stopped the 0-pointer. A sacrificial play. Very noble. Very heroic. He leaned in, his face inches from Izuku's. But here, you're just trying to be a copy of your father. You're using your clothes to mimic strength you don't have. You're relying on the durability of a gym uniform to bridge the gap between you and powerhouses like Bakugo. Aizawa pointed at Izuku's chest. What happens when your thread snaps? What happens when you're naked? Best Jeanist is a top hero not because of his denim, but because of his discipline. You are just hiding behind the fabric. Izuku stared at him. The words cut deeper than any knife. Hiding behind the fabric. Aizawa blinked. His hair fell. I've returned your quirk. You have 2 throws left. Hurry up and get it over with. Izuku stood in the circle. His heart pounded. He thinks I'm a fake. Just like Kaken. He thinks I'm relying on the suit to carry me. Izuku looked at the ball. He looked at his arm. He remembered the sludge villain. He remembered the feeling of the threads inside Bakugo's jacket. Don't use the shirt as armor. Use it as a conductor. He didn't wind up for a massive throw this time. He didn't try to mimic All Might. He held the ball in his right hand. He grabbed the sleeve of his right arm with his left hand. Focus. Not on the shirt. On the muscles beneath the shirt. The fabric of his sleeve tightened. But instead of just stiffening, Izuku wove the fibers into the pores of his skin, a microscopic, painful connection. He bonded the sleeve to his arm, turning the polyester into a literal extension of his tricep. Don't throw with the shoulder. Throw with the snap. He cocked his arm back like a whip. Tension. Tension. Snap! He whipped his arm forward. At the last microsecond, he commanded the sleeve to contract violently, adding explosive kinetic energy to his natural throw. Crack! The sound was like a gunshot. The ball rocketed into the air, soaring high and fast. At the same time, the sleeve of his gym uniform disintegrated. The force of the snap shredded the fabric completely, leaving his right arm bare, red, and covered in friction burns. Izuku stood panting, clutching his exposed arm. He looked at Aizawa. Aizawa looked at the device. 702.1 meters. Izuku lifted his chin. He straightened his back, despite the pain. I didn't break my arm, Izuku said, his voice trembling but defiant. I just broke the pattern. Aizawa stared at him. A slow, Terrifying grin spread across his face. Standard modification approved, Aizawa muttered. The results. The sun was setting by the time the tests were done. Izuku was exhausted. His arms stung. His favorite sewing kit was going to get a workout tonight repairing his sleeve. Time for the results, Aizawa said. The total is simply the aggregate of your marks. He projected a hologram. Izuku didn't want to look. He squeezed his eyes shut. I was average in the sprint. Good in the jump. Bad in the side steps. Good in the throw. He opened one eye. 1. Momo Yaoyorozu. 2. Shoto Todoroki. 3. Katsuki Bakugo. 4. Tenya Ida. 7. Izuku Midoriya. 7th. He was 7th. He let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. He wasn't first. But he was far, far from last. By the way, Aizawa said, dismissing the hologram. I was lying about the expulsion. Ha! It was a logical ruse to draw out your upper limits. Way out? The class screamed. Of course it was a lie. A tall girl with a ponytail, Yaoyorozu said confidently. It was obvious if you thought about it. Izuku looked at Aizawa. The man was walking away, scratching his neck. No, Izuku analyzed. That wasn't a lie. The air, the killing intent, it was real. If I had failed the ball throw, if I had stayed hidden behind the fabric, he would have cut me. Aizawa paused and looked back at Izuku. He glanced at the shredded sleeve. Midoriya, Aizawa called. Yes, sir. Stop at the support office. Get a costume requisition form. If you're going to destroy your clothes every time you fight, you're going to go broke buying uniforms. Yes, sir. The walk home. That was so scary. Uraraka sighed, walking beside Izuku. I really thought I was gonna die. Ida was incredible though, Izuku said, trying to deflect. That 50-meter dash. Indeed. Ida chopped the air. But Midoriya, your ball throw was spectacular. The snap generated by the torque of the fabric. Simply ingenious. Hey, wait up. Izuku froze. He knew that stomp. Bakugo marched up to them. He stopped in front of Izuku. He wasn't yelling. He was vibrating with suppressed rage. You! Bakugo hissed. 700 meters. That's almost exactly what I got. It was 3 meters less, Kaken, Izuku said quietly. Don't give me that specifics crap. Bakugo grabbed Izuku's collar, the collar of his blazer. Ida stepped forward. Bakugo! Unhand him. Bakugo ignored him. He glared into Izuku's eyes. You've been holding out on me. You've been hiding that kind of power? It's not power, Izuku said, not breaking eye contact. He reached up and gently removed Bakugo's hand from his collar. He smoothed the fabric. It's technique. You have a sledgehammer, Kaken. I have a needle. We just broke the same wall. Bakugo stared at him. He looked at Izuku's calm, disciplined face. It pissed him off more than the crying ever did. I'm going to burn you, Bakugo whispered. I'm going to burn every thread you have until there's nothing left to hide behind. Bakugo turned and stormed off toward the train station. What is his problem? Uraraka puffed her cheeks. He's so intense. He's driven, Izuku said. He looked down at his own hands. They were trembling slightly. Are you okay, Midoriya-kun? Ida asked. Izuku looked at his new friends. He took a deep breath. He reached up to his neck. Slowly, deliberately, he loosened his tie. He undid the top button of his shirt. He let out a long sigh. I am now, Izuku smiled. Let's go to the station. I think I want to buy a juice from the vending machine. A cheap one. Uraraka laughed. Living dangerously, Mr. Fancy. As they walked into the sunset, Izuku felt a strange sensation. The tight weave of his life, the pressure of the Hakamata legacy, the fear of failure, felt just a little bit looser. He had survived the first fitting. And for the first time, the uniform felt like it actually belonged to him. The locker room was a symphony of zippers, Velcro, and nervous breathing. For most of Class 1A, this was the moment they had been dreaming of since they were children. Putting on the suit. The transformation from student to symbol. For Izuku Midoriya, it was just another Tuesday. He stood in front of his open locker, staring at the contents of the silver briefcase marked with the Hakamata agency crest. Inside lay his hero costume, Item 144 Beta. Whoa, Midoriya! Eijiro Kirishima leaned around the locker door, his own chest bare as he strapped on gear-shaped shoulder pads. Is that real denim? Izuku carefully lifted the jacket from the case. 14-ounce raw selvage denim from Okayama, he recited automatically. Reinforced with a Kevlar carbon weave. It's fire-resistant up to 800 degrees, /proof, and has a tensile strength rating of Class A. Dude, Denki Kaminari whistled, struggling to pull on a black leather jacket. That sounds expensive. My costume is just, well, it conducts electricity. Izuku didn't smile. He stepped into the trousers. They were stiff, unyielding. They required force to put on. He pulled the jacket over his shoulders. The high collar rose instantly, framing his jawline and obscuring his mouth. It wasn't just a style choice. The collar contained a rebreather filter and a voice modulator. He tightened the belts around his waist and thighs. These weren't for holding up pants. They were spools. Each belt housing contained 50 meters of high-density capture wire, thinner than hair but stronger than steel piano wire. Finally, he pulled on the boots. Heavy, steel-toed, with grip soles designed for vertical wall running. He looked in the mirror. He didn't look like All Might. He looked like a miniature, greener version of Best Jeanist. The lines were sharp. The silhouette was severe. There was no room for error in a suit like this. If you slouched, the collar dug into your neck. The suit demanded perfection. You look like a pro already, Kirishima grinned. Man, having a hero dad must be awesome. It has its expectations, Izuku murmured, his voice slightly muffled by the collar. Across the room, Katsuki Bakugo slammed his locker shut. He was wearing massive, grenade-shaped gauntlets. His costume was an explosion of black and orange, ragged and aggressive. It was the antithesis of Izuku's tailored perfection. Bakugo growled, not looking at Izuku. Don't trip on your fancy pants. I have adjusted the hem, Kaken, Izuku replied evenly. Tripping is not in the itinerary. Bakugo scoffed and stomped out. Izuku took a deep breath. Style versus substance. Today, I have to prove I have both. Ground Beta. I am here. All Might burst through the tunnel entrance, his cape flowing majestically in a wind that seemed to exist solely for him. Coming through the door like a hero, the class cheered. Even Izuku felt a spark of excitement. This was All Might. The symbol of peace. And he was their teacher. Welcome to Hero Basic Training. All Might boomed, hands on his hips. You all look fantastic. Cool. Now, shall we get started? Today, we are doing battle trials. Tenya Ida raised his hand. He was wearing a suit of white armor that looked like a high-end car engine. Sensei. This is the same mock city from the entrance exam. Will we be conducting urban maneuvering? No, young Ida. We're moving indoors. Villain cleanup is where the real work happens. Most heinous crimes occur in the shadows. Imprisonment. House arrest. Backroom deals. In this society, the cleverest villains hide indoors. All Might pulled out a box. You will be split into villains and heroes. 2-on-2 battles. The villains guard a nuclear weapon in the hideout. The heroes have 15 minutes to capture the villains or touch the weapon. Simple. Efficient. Plus ultra. Izuku felt a knot of anxiety tighten in his stomach. Indoor combat. Close quarters. That's good for my quirk. I can use the environment. Now let's draw lots. Izuku watched the screen. Team A, Heroes Izuku Midoriya Ochako Uraraka. Team D, Villains Katsuki Bakugo Tenya Ida. The air in the monitoring room seemed to freeze. Fate is a funny thing. All Might laughed, though his eyes darted between Izuku and Bakugo with concern. Team A will infiltrate. Team D will defend. Everyone else, to the monitoring room. Bakugo turned slowly. His mask covered his eyes, but his grin was feral. He pointed a gauntlet finger at Izuku. Don't hold back, Valor, Bakugo sneered, using the hero name Izuku had tentatively floated during orientation. I want to see what happens when that expensive suit burns. Izuku straightened his collar. I don't intend to burn, Kaken. The setup. The building was a concrete brutalist structure, 5 stories of gray dust and shadows. Inside the weapon room on the 5th floor, Ida was taking his role very seriously. Wahahaha. Ida laughed stiffly, striking a pose. I am extremely evil. I must secure this weapon so I can do evil things. He looked around the room. It was cluttered. Tables, chairs, loose pipes. This is a hazard, Ida muttered, breaking character. Midoriya's quirk relies on available material. If there are loose objects, he can turn them into weapons or traps. As a villain, I should clear the floor. Ida activated his engines. He began zooming around the room, shoving all the furniture into the far corner, stripping the room bare. Hey! Bakugo barked from the doorway. What are you doing, Four Eyes? Strategic denial of resources. Ida explained. Midoriya needs loose threads or objects to manipulate. If the room is empty, he is powerless. Ha, Bakugo scoffed. It doesn't matter. He's not getting past the 2nd floor. We should coordinate a defense strategy. My strategy is simple, Bakugo growled, walking toward the exit. I'm gonna blow him up. Wait. You're leaving the objective undefended? He's coming for me, Bakugo said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. He's always watching me. Analyzing me. Thinking he's better than me because his dad is a top 3 hero. I'm going to show him the difference between a legacy hire and a real prodigy. Bakugo disappeared into the stairwell. The infiltration. Outside, Izuku and Uraraka stood by the blueprint of the building. Okay, Izuku whispered, tracing the map. Ida is diligent. He'll be guarding the weapon closely. He's likely removed obstacles. But Kaken, Bakugo-kun is scary, Uraraka admitted, adjusting her helmet. Do you think he'll attack us? He won't just attack. He'll hunt, Izuku said. He has a grudge. A complex one. Against you? Yeah. He thinks my quirk is cheating. Because I manipulate what's already there, while he creates power from nothing. Izuku sighed. We can't fight him head-on. His explosions produce heat and shockwaves. Heat weakens fibers. Shockwaves disrupt my control connection. He is the worst possible matchup for me. So what do? We split up, Izuku said firmly. I'll draw his fire. I'll keep him occupied. You use your zero gravity to sneak past and secure the weapon. Ida is fast, but in a confined space, if you can float him, he loses traction. But, can you beat Bakugo alone? Uraraka asked worriedly. Izuku touched the spool of wire at his hip. I don't have to beat him, Izuku said, though he didn't sound convinced. I just have to survive him. Start. All Might's voice echoed over the speakers. Izuku and Uraraka entered through a window on the 1st floor. The hallway was dark, smelling of stale concrete. They moved silently. Izuku walked with the jeanist glide, a way of rolling the feet from heel to toe to minimize sound and vibration. Uraraka tried to mimic him but ended up just tiptoeing comically. They reached the 2nd floor landing. Silence. Too quiet. Uraraka-san, Izuku whispered. Get back. Huh! Izuku shoved her. Boom! The wall next to them exploded. Debris and smoke filled the corridor. A massive, jagged hole appeared in the masonry. Stepping through the smoke, dust swirling around his grenade gauntlets, was Bakugo. Found you, he hissed. He didn't wait. He lunged. Izuku reacted on instinct. Style. Form. Defense. He whipped his right arm out. A spool of white capture tape shot from his wrist dispenser. It wasn't aimed at Bakugo. It was aimed at the ceiling pipe above him. Connect. Izuku yanked. The tape contracted, pulling Izuku upward into a flip. Bakugo's explosion detonated right where Izuku had been standing. The heat singed the soles of Izuku's boots. Running away? Bakugo yelled, propelling himself up with a blast. Uraraka! Go! Izuku shouted, hanging upside down from the pipe like a spider. Uraraka scrambled past Bakugo, who ignored her completely. His eyes were locked on the green suit. Just you and me, Deku! Bakugo fired a right hook. Izuku released the tape, dropping to the floor. He landed in a crouch, one hand touching the ground. Loose threads? No. Just concrete. He touched his own belt. He pulled out a length of binding wire. Binding cloth. Snake strike. Izuku whipped the wire forward. It moved with sentient precision, aiming to wrap around Bakugo's wrist. Pop pop pop! Bakugo created a series of small, rapid explosions in his palm, creating a deflection shield. The shockwaves battered the wire away. Your fancy string tricks don't work on me, Bakugo roared. He closed the distance. He swung his gauntlet. Izuku ducked, feeling the wind of the heavy metal casing brush his hair. He's fast. Faster than middle school. Izuku backed up, unspooling more wire, trying to create a web to slow Bakugo down. He wove a net across the hallway. Bakugo didn't stop. He blasted right through it. The fire incinerated the fibers instantly. Fire beats fabric. Bakugo laughed. Don't you know your element chart, genius? Izuku was forced backward, retreating down the hall. He was losing ground. Every time he tried to set a trap, Bakugo burned it. Every time he tried to bind him, Bakugo blasted it. I can't get a grip. I can't find purchase. Izuku's breath was coming in short gasps inside his high collar. He was sweating. The suit felt heavy. Father says, when the opponent is overwhelming, control the pace. Look elegant. But there was nothing elegant about this. Izuku was scrambling. He was diving behind pillars. He was getting battered by shockwaves. Boom! A massive blast caught him. Izuku was thrown into a wall. The impact knocked the wind out of him. He slid down, coughing. He looked at his costume. The beautiful denim jacket was scorched. The left sleeve was tattered. The high collar was askew. Bakugo walked toward him, smoke rising from his palms. Look at you, Bakugo sneered. All dressed up and nowhere to go. You're just a cosplayer, Deku. You rely on your dad's tech and your dad's style. But when it gets messy, you fold. Bakugo raised his gauntlet. He reached for the pin on the side. Kaken! Don't! Izuku yelled, recognizing the stance. He won't die if he dodges. In the monitor room, All Might screamed into the microphone. Young Bakugo! Stop! You'll kill him! Bakugo pulled the pin. Boom! The blast was blinding. It filled the entire hallway. The heat was instantaneous. Izuku didn't dodge. He couldn't. The hallway was too narrow. Instead, he did the only thing he could. He grabbed the hem of his own cape, a reinforced, fireproof sheet he wore for gliding, and whipped it in front of him. Harden! He pumped every ounce of focus into the cape. He turned the fabric into a steel wall. The explosion hit. The steel wall shattered. The force was too great. Izuku was blasted backward, smashing through the drywall of the adjacent room. He tumbled across the floor, crashing into a desk. Dust settled. Izuku lay there. His ears were ringing. His cape was gone, incinerated. His jacket was shredded, revealing the undersuit. His mask was cracked. He tried to stand up. His legs shook. Is that it? Bakugo's voice came from the hole in the wall. Is that the power of the Hakamata family? Izuku looked down at his hands. They were trembling. I tried to block it. I tried to use the cloth as a shield. Just like father taught. But cloth burns. Style creates limitations. Izuku spat out a mouthful of blood. He looked around the room he had been blasted into. It was a storage room. Concrete floor. Exposed rebar in the ceiling where the blast had weakened the structure. Style versus substance. Aizawa's words from the quirk apprehension test came back to him. You are just hiding behind the fabric. Izuku gritted his teeth. He reached up and tore off the remains of his high collar. He threw it on the floor. No more hiding, he whispered. He stood up. He didn't brush the dust off his shoulders. He didn't straighten his tie, which was now missing. He stood with a slouch, his arms hanging loose. Bakugo stepped into the room. Oh? You still want to play? Izuku didn't answer. He looked at the floor. Concrete is a mixture. Aggregate bonded by cement. But inside every modern building, is a skeleton. Kaken, Izuku said, his voice raspy. You're right. Fabric is weak against fire. Finally admitting it? But... Izuku looked up. His eyes weren't calm anymore. They were wide, manic, analytical. Everything has a thread. If you look deep enough. Izuku dropped to one knee. He slammed both hands onto the concrete floor. He didn't activate his quirk on his clothes. He activated it on the floor. He pushed his awareness down. Past the dust. Past the cement. There, the rebar mesh. The steel grid that held the building together. What are you doing? Bakugo frowned. Izuku screamed. It wasn't a hero's scream. It was a cry of pure exertion. Unravel! The floor beneath Bakugo exploded, not with fire. With steel. The concrete cracked and shattered as the rebar mesh underneath twisted and surged upward, responding to Izuku's call. It was messy. It was ugly. It was jagged metal tearing through stone. What the hell? Bakugo jumped back, blasting the ground. But you can't burn steel rebar with a quick blast. The metal rods shot up like twisted vines, snagging Bakugo's leg. Get off! Bakugo roared, blasting his own leg free. But Izuku wasn't done. He was crawling forward on his hands and knees, his fingers digging into the cracks in the floor, blood leaking from his fingernails. I can't beat you with style, Izuku yelled. So I'll beat you with the building. He yanked his hands up. The electrical wiring from the walls ripped free, sparking and dancing like angry snakes. The copper wires whipped toward Bakugo. Bakugo blasted them, but there were hundreds. They wrapped around his gauntlets. They wrapped around his ankles. You trash! Bakugo screamed, panic entering his voice for the first time. This wasn't the precise, predictable Izuku. This was chaos. Bakugo let off a massive explosion, clearing the wires. But the smoke blinded him. And in that smoke, Izuku moved. He didn't glide. He tackled. He slammed into Bakugo's midsection, driving him into the wall. Get off me! Bakugo raised a hand to blast Izuku's back. Izuku didn't let go. He grabbed the straps of Bakugo's grenade gauntlets. Material, canvas. Weave, heavy duty. Control. Izuku tightened the straps instantly. He crushed Bakugo's wrists. Ack. Bakugo dropped his hands, the pain causing him to misfire into the floor. Uraraka! Izuku screamed into his comms. Now! Do it now! I'm at the weapon! Uraraka's voice crackled. But Ida cleared the room. I have nothing to float to distract him. Use the debris! Izuku yelled, holding on to a thrashing Bakugo. I'm sending you some ammo. Izuku looked up. The ceiling above them was cracked from the rebar manipulation. He grabbed the hanging wire. Snap! He pulled with all his might. He didn't just pull the wire. He pulled the entire support truss of the false ceiling. The ceiling of the fourth floor collapsed. Dust, tiles, and metal rained down. But the force of the collapse traveled up. The floor of the fifth floor, the ceiling of the fourth, buckled. In the weapon room, the floor lurched. Ida stumbled. What is happening? Ida cried. Debris from the floor below shot up through the cracks. Comet home run! Uraraka yelled. She grabbed a jagged piece of concrete that had jutted up, made it weightless, and swung a pillar like a bat. She hit the debris raining from the ceiling, launching a storm of rocks at Ida. Recipro burst. Ida tried to dodge, but the room was filled with floating shrapnel. While Ida was distracted batting away rocks, Uraraka leaped. She floated over his head. She hugged the papier-mâché nuclear core. Secured. Hero team wins. All Might's voice boomed through the speakers. On the fourth floor, the silence returned. Izuku lay on top of Bakugo. They were both covered in gray dust. The room looked like a bomb had gone off, but a messy, structural bomb, not a clean fire bomb. Izuku's suit was destroyed. His hands were raw and bleeding. Bakugo lay there, breathing hard. His gauntlets were twisted, the straps digging into his skin. He stared up at the exposed pipes in the ceiling. You! Bakugo wheezed. You wrecked the whole floor. Izuku rolled off him, collapsing onto his back. He stared at the ceiling too. Yeah, Izuku whispered. Father is going to hate this. The review. The monitor room was silent when Team A and Team D returned. Izuku was limping. He had refused a stretcher, but he looked like he had been through a shredder. Bakugo was fuming, his arms crossed, refusing to look at anyone. Well? All Might coughed, breaking the tension. That was intense. Who can tell me the MVP of this battle? I can, sir. Momo Yayorozu raised her hand. Go ahead, young Yayorozu. It was Ida, she stated calmly. Eh? Uraraka blinked. But we won! Ida was the only one who adapted to the scenario properly, Momo explained. He prepared the room to counter his opponent's quirk. He stayed on objective. She turned to Bakugo. Bakugo acted on a personal grudge, abandoned the objective, and used lethal force indoors. He is lucky he didn't bring the building down. She turned to Izuku. Izuku flinched, expecting praise for his strategy, and Midoriya, she sighed. While your final improvisation was effective, it was catastrophically reckless. You caused structural damage to the load-bearing elements of the facility. If this were a real building, it might have collapsed on top of you, the villain, and any hostages on the floors above or below. You sacrificed safety for a win. That is not elegant. That is desperation. Izuku looked down at his boots. Yes. You're right. However, All Might interjected, seeing Izuku's face fall. There is something to be said for spirit. Young Midoriya faced a counter matchup and found a way to win. And young Bakugo. Well, your aim was true, even if your judgment was poor. All Might gave a thumbs up, but his smile was tight. He had seen the way Izuku fought at the end. It wasn't the calculated, restrained style of best jeanist. It was feral. It was tenacious. It was familiar. The locker room. The adrenaline had faded, leaving only pain. Izuku sat on the bench, struggling to undo the buckles of his ruined costume. His fingers were swollen. Here, a gruff voice said. Izuku looked up. It was Todoroki. The dual-haired boy knelt down and froze the buckle, snapping the metal so it fell open. Oh. Thank you, Todoroki-kun, Izuku said, surprised. You fought hard, Todoroki said flatly. You fought ugly. Is that a compliment? In this line of work? Yes. Todoroki stood up and walked away. The other boys were giving Izuku space. They had seen the footage. They saw him rip concrete with his bare hands and wire. It changed their perception of the jeanist kid. He wasn't just a rich kid in a suit. He was dangerous. Izuku finally got his street clothes on. He picked up his phone. One new message. Sender, father, I watched the feed. We need to discuss the difference between improvisation and vandalism. Also, bring the suit to the support studio immediately. Do not be late for dinner. Izuku sighed, resting his forehead against the cool metal of the locker. Vandalism, he chuckled weakly. The door slammed open. Bakugo stood there, fully dressed in his uniform. He looked at Izuku. His eyes were red, puffy. I'm not gonna say you won, Bakugo said, his voice shaking with suppressed emotion. I know, Izuku said. You used a trick. You broke the floor. You fought like a rat. I did, but... Bakugo clenched his fists. You didn't run. You didn't hide. Bakugo took a step forward. Next time, I won't lose to a rat. I'm going to be the undisputed number one. And to do that, I have to crush you completely. So don't you dare lose to anyone else, you hear me? You're mine to beat. Bakugo turned and stormed out. Izuku watched him go. It was the strangest declaration of war he had ever heard. But it was better than die. Izuku picked up his bag. He looked at the ruined remains of his denim jacket in the trash bin. He had lost his style. He had lost his composure. He had terrified his classmates, but he had won. Heir to the fiber, he thought. Maybe the fiber isn't always silk. Sometimes, it's steel wool. He walked out of the school, the sunset casting long shadows. He was sore, he was in trouble with his dad, and he had a lot of explaining to do, but for the first time, he felt like a hero who could stand on his own 2 feet, even if he had to rip the floor apart to do it.